that many of the businesses that were thought to be monopolies, private monopolies, that nobody could ever challenge, in fact, were successfully challenged. In the 1960s, the U.S. government had an antitrust case against IBM, the computer manufacturer. It was the biggest antitrust case ever. It lasted 11 or 12 years. They accused IBM of monopolizing a thing called a key punch machine. Of course, personal computers challenged IBM and their technology, and that was simply not a problem. In a free market system, as long as a business doesn't have access to the use of force, which is in the hands of government, I don't worry about that problem.
Our next question is from Bolivia. It is from la Universidad Privada Boliviana in Cochabamba, Bolivia.
Hello. Gracias, Dr. Hudgins.
What can an educational institution do, like a university, for instance, in order to contribute to improve on the ethical values when there is a total crisis in society, in the context that there is corruption, there is bribery, and there is political influence? So what can a university contribute within that context and that situation?
Ms. Berry, why don't you address that?
One of the things that universities globally are starting to do are at least to offer up the opportunity to educate students about these issues. My understanding is that in a lot of Latin American countries, ethics is still very much a part of the curriculum, not only in the high school level, but also at the university level. In many other countries, and the United States is one of them, ethics is not a required course in many universities. Making it a required course, actually opening the discussion and having a sense of what the social responsibility is for these students as they go into the corporations is a key beginning.
Dr. Hudgins?
No, I agree. I think talking about it is the most important thing. Universities are often the places where ideas filter into society. It's crucial. Ideas have consequences, and I would say this program that we're participating in right now and programs like it are very important.
Our next question is from Mexico. It is from la Universidad Tecnológica de Tecamachalco in the state of Puebla in Mexico.
Good morning. In the labor relations, employee-employer, the ethics and responsibility is really taken. Can it be taken into account when there are so many people looking for jobs, and the person then is hired, but then they don't file realization, and they are just merely getting a very small salary just to barely survive? In this case, there is the same situation vis-a-vis, for instance, the big countries, the developed countries, who also act as big enterprises, who don't really pay their smaller countries who act as employees who are begging for a job and to barely survive. Thank you for the comments to this question.
I'll say two things. First of all, in countries that have serious employment problems, usually it's because of systemic policies, and these policies will have to be dealt with. As I say, Senor De Soto in Peru has done an excellent study of his own country. I've seen studies in India and other places that illustrate that the reason people can't get jobs or can't expand small enterprises is often because of corruption and bad government policies. The second thing is that I disagree that big countries often act like big businesses and keep small countries down. It really depends on the policies of the small countries. Examples. 35 years ago, Taiwan was an extremely poor place. Hong Kong was an extremely poor place. Today, those two countries have living standards at the level of Western countries. On the other hand, you have some Western countries that are beginning to slip very, very seriously in their economics, including European countries. You have Estonia that has emerged out of the former Soviet Union doing quite well. So it really depends on the domestic policies of emerging countries, not on whether big countries treat them in a certain way. Though I am for complete free trade, incidentally, we should open our markets to Cuba, to Mexico, to all countries. That opportunity will keep America honest and give opportunity to countries everywhere in the world.
Thank you. Our next question is from Costa Rica. It is from the Centro Costarricense de Ciencia y Cultura in San Jose, Costa Rica.
Hello, buenos días. Hello, good morning. My question is for
Mi
Dr.
pregunta es para el
Hudgins.
Dr. Hudgins.
You have
usted
criticized the Kyoto and Rio summits for their environmental regulation, and I respect your opinion regarding the politician issues involved. Nevertheless, how do you think we should protect the environment from some unethical companies that destroy it?
That is an excellent question. And I will give two quick answers. First of all, there have been studies that indicate that environments begin to improve at about a certain level of development, usually $5,000 to $6,000 of gross domestic product per capita, because part of the modernization process is to use resources in a more environmentally friendly and economically responsible manner. And we see this pattern, and there have been good studies about this. Second, I believe that using private property rights is a good way to protect the environment. Nobody has should have the power or the authority, for example, to dump garbage on my property. It is my property. If we treat water and other resources as property and establish property rights in resources, then I think you can protect the environment in an economically responsible manner. There has been a lot of good work done in this area in the United States, and if you're interested, please contact us and look at our website at Cato, and we will help you with more information.
Thank you. Let us begin with Module 2, in which Megan Berry will discuss how to establish ethics programs and codes of business conduct, and how to monitor and measure the success of such programs and codes.
It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you today about organizational ethics and responsibilities, optimizing performance in the third millennium. I'm going to spend the next 30 minutes talking about the how-tos. How to create a global ethics program, how to create a code of business conduct, how to set up an ethics office, how to monitor ethical behavior, and how to measure a program's effectiveness. I'll conclude my remarks by taking a look at some of the key issues that will impact organizations in the third millennium. So, why do organizations need ethics? In today's global environment, we are constantly bombarded with information about companies who are doing the wrong thing. Examples from Texaco in Ecuador to IBM in Argentina. Very rarely do we hear about companies who are trying to do the right thing. And although there are no organizations that I know of that have figured everything out, there are definitely organizations out there that are striving to implement programs and processes that encourage and promote ethical behavior. I'll highlight some of those organizations today. In order to set the stage for this discussion, we need to spend a moment on the concept of organizational values. What are values? This may seem like a very basic concept. I'm sure each of you has a set of beliefs that you would call values. In fact, take a moment to write down on a piece of paper some of the values that you believe in. We'll come back to them in a minute. Whenever I talk to a group of individuals about values, the first question that comes up is whose values? The assumption is that there is no set of common shared values, and that the concept of a universal moral code cannot exist because all of us are so unique. Think about that for a moment. Do you believe that we all have different values? In 1996, Rushworth Kidder, a respected journalist and founder for the Institute for Global Ethics, conducted what he called a global values survey at the State of the World Forum's annual meeting. This forum, co-chaired by Mikhail Gorbachev, Ruud Lubbers, and Oscar Arias, drew together a number of world leaders to, quote, consider those principles, values, and actions that should guide humanity as it moves toward the next century. The survey asked questions about values to individuals from a variety of nations, traditions, and perspectives. And in the end, 6 shared values emerged. They are truth, compassion, responsibility, freedom, reverence for life, and fairness. Now, go back to the values that I asked you to write down earlier. Are any of the values that you believe in captured in the values that I just mentioned? You might use a different word. For example, for fairness, you might have written justice. Instead of reverence for life, you might have written concern for human rights. Derek Bach, the former president of the Harvard University, says, if you look at virtually all of the civilizations that we've had over the past few centuries, one does find disagreements on the details, but you also find a remarkable consensus on certain basic ethical precepts which form the basic foundation for a serious ethical code. The zone of agreement is vast. We're arguing about exactly where the borderline is in just a few fringe areas. What Derek says is very important. Our zone of agreement is vast. It's how we navigate that fringe that requires contemplation. I mentioned earlier that truth and responsibility are values that we as humans all believe in. Our problems come when these essential human values are in conflict. It's easy to determine right versus wrong. It's much more difficult to make an ethical decision when forced with a right versus right conflict. Let me give you an example. When we raise our children, we teach them to always tell the truth. We also teach them to be responsible to their friends, families, and others. A study was done where children aged 10 were given the following scenario. Your friend has written graffiti on the outside of the school building. You saw your friend do it, and the principal asks you point blank, do you know who vandalized the school? What do you tell the principal? In this scenario, we have a values conflict. The child has been taught to always tell the truth. However, the child has also been taught that responsibility to his friend is equally important because the child has learned that loyalty is part of being responsible to friends. If you were that child, what would you do? This leads us into a discussion about organizational values. Let's change that scenario and give it more of a business flavor. You see one of your friends at work take home some office supplies, a couple of pens, a notebook. The next day your boss says to you, do you know who took the pens and notebooks from the supply cabinet? What do you say? Perhaps you know that your friend was going to give the supplies to a school where he was volunteering after work. Perhaps you know that if you tell your boss that your friend took the supplies, your friend will lose his job. Telling the truth and being loyal and compassionate to your friend are in conflict. Depending on your organization's values, you may respond in different ways. If your organization values truth, you will probably tell your boss. If your organization values loyalty, you may deny knowing who did it. So then, where do organizational values come from? Many organizations, including Merck, Metal-Levy, Johnson & Johnson, The Body Shop, Thomas Cook, and Hyatt have put together value statements and codes of conduct. These documents clearly outline an organization's values. In fact, most multinational corporations have these documents. Does your organization have such a document? If so, have you read it? I often ask that question when I speak to groups such as this, because when I ask about having a code, etc., almost every hand in the room goes up. But when I ask how many people have actually read the code, almost all the hands in the room go down. So often these documents contain beautiful graphics, nice pictures, and carefully crafted words. But if the individuals and the organizations don't believe in the statements, in fact, don't even read the document, it's worthless. So how do you create organizational values that people believe? As I said earlier, there are basic values that all humans believe in. The key is to use those values in your professional environment. Think how hard it would be if every day you came to work and had to check your values at the door. Individuals who are asked to be one person at work and someone else at home develop a moral schizophrenia. So how do you develop a global ethics program that incorporates universally agreed upon human values? Lori Tansey Martins, the founder and president of the International Business Ethics Institute, suggests that a first step should be to determine the business's objectives. Why does your organization need or want to implement a global ethical strategy? Well, if your organization is like most others, creating an ethical organization based on core principles will be essential as more and more organizations participate in the global market. Philippe de Margière, the Secretary General of Suez Lyonnaise des Eaux, a French and Belgian company with over 186 employees, says, "It is clear that our future growth will focus mainly on the rest of the world, beyond our two home countries. Becoming worldwide in scope means becoming multicultural, which in turn means learning and growing from other cultures, and seeking new management modes. Ethical values are precisely where men and women come together, whatever their national backgrounds or differences. The mutual understanding that comes from shared values is essential to confidence, which is at the heart of any business." Once you have determined your objectives, your company must create a global code of business conduct. Forming a code is a three-step process. The first step, conduct an organizational analysis. The second, to draft a code of global business conduct. And the third, to create an awareness of the code through training. The first step is to conduct an organizational analysis. Having both the board of directors and CEO involvement is critical. In a study conducted recently by the Conference Board of New York, the frequency of board of director participation in helping to shape an organization's principles nearly doubled between 1987 and 1998. In 1987, 21% of boards of directors were involved in shaping the principles. By 1998, that had risen to 78%. There is also an increase in engaging stakeholders beyond employees. I'm sure many of you have heard the term stakeholder. A stakeholder is an individual or group that has a vested interest in the success or failure of your organization. Who are your stakeholders? You would probably say employees, customers, shareholders, suppliers and partners, and the communities where we do business. All of these stakeholders expect certain commitments from your company. Companies like Royal Dutch Shell have even gone so far as to invite academics and non-government organizations to participate in these kinds of discussions. In 1994, Shell began their Transformation Initiative, and by the end of 1996, had conducted discussions with non-employees regarding the public view of the social role of multinationals and the company's reputation in fulfilling it. In all, Shell interviewed over 7,500 members of the general public in 10 countries and 1,300 opinion leaders in 25 countries. From this extensive stakeholder engagement, Shell produced Profit and Principles. Does there have to be a choice? The second step in formulating a code is to actually draft the code. In a recent Conference Board report, Global Corporate Ethics Practices, a developed consensus, the Conference Board found 4 types of code formulations. They are instrumental, compliance, stakeholder commitment, and values. Instrumental codes stress that employees' adherence to the organization's ethics principles is critical to bottom-line success. These types of codes are often designed to notify employees that they will be judged by conduct as well as performance, and to convince stockholders that high ethical standards are the key to long-term maximization of shareholder value. Compliance codes are straightforward statements of do's and don'ts. Employees' conduct is often the primary focus of compliance statements. Stakeholder commitment codes use discussions of the company's relationships with its various dependent groups as the organizing principle for a statement of its ethical principles. And the last one, values codes, they establish certain ethics principles, modes of behavior, and habits of mind as essential to what it means to be an employee or representative of the organization. When I was the ethics officer at Nortel Networks, we needed to put together a new code of business conduct. Our previous code, drafted by lawyers in the 1980s, was very compliance-driven. It basically contained a list of thou shalt nots. In fact, the opening statement in our old code was, profit is essential. Now what's wrong with that? Profit is essential if you want to stay in business. However, it should never be the first line in your code of business conduct. Why? Because then everything that comes after that is unimportant. Profit is still part of the revised Nortel Networks code. It now sits as part of the commitment to shareholders. Obtaining employee input when drafting a code is also essential. At Nortel Networks, we did something pretty radical. We asked our employees to write the code of conduct. We did this by conducting over 36 focus groups in all of our major regions, including Latin America, the Caribbean, Asia Pacific, Europe, and North America. We also invited all of our 70,000 employees to read the draft versions and to give us input and ideas. We had over 1,200 employees send us their thoughts. This gave the employees a voice in the process and a true sense of ownership in the completed code. This approach also helped us write a document using more global language. For example, we used questions and answers throughout the code to make it more readable. One of our focus groups from Europe pointed out what we decided was a true North Americanism. In one of our questions, we asked, do people really get dismissed for violating our ethical standards? In one of our original drafts, we had asked, do people really get terminated for violating our ethical standards? The Europeans were horrified. As one focus group member said, when you say we terminate them, do you mean we kill them? The final code of conduct created by Nortel is based on a stakeholder approach and lists Nortel's commitments to its various stakeholders. For example, Nortel states that to its employees, it will treat each individual with respect and provide work that is satisfying. To its shareholders, it states it will provide value while maintaining financial prudence. To its customers, it will provide high-quality network solutions, including safe and environmentally responsible products. To its suppliers, it will be fair and honest in all business transactions. And to its communities, it will contribute to the well-being and improvement of towns, cities, and regions wherever it operates. Nortel wanted all of these stakeholders to know what it stood for, so it was one of the first companies to place the code on the World Wide Web. When I was the ethics officer, we received an overwhelming response from our web presence, from potential employees who said, "Hey, I really like what the company stands for. It's a place I would really like to work," to suppliers calling and saying, "You know, your code says this, but let me tell you what's really going on." By making the code accessible to all stakeholders, Nortel began to make itself accountable for what it had articulated. The third step in the code process is to create an awareness of the code through training. Ethics training and code of conduct awareness can be accomplished in many ways. Depending on the size of your organization and the number of employees needing training, several options exist. The key is to train all employees, not just middle and low-level employees. The code should articulate the standards that all employees are expected to adhere to, from the chief executive officer on down the line to the line workers. Don't let there be a perception of a double standard. More than once, I've heard employees in different organizations say, "I have to do what the code says, but senior management doesn't. They play by different rules." This will be the quickest way for an ethics program to fail. If your organization is relatively small, having live, in-person training and presentations are ideal. This gives employees an opportunity to raise issues and concerns. Other effective training methodologies include CD-ROM training, web-based training, and televideo conferencing. Rolling out the Code of Conduct should not be a one-time event where everyone gets a copy, puts it on the shelf, and forgets about it. The code should be integrated into existing training programs like sales and marketing, supply management, new employee training, and new manager training. Also, annual or semi-annual performance reviews offer ideal opportunities for managers and employees to once again revisit and re-articulate the company's values on a regular basis. Tenet Healthcare, a U.S.-based company, goes one step further. Tenet actually ties employee performance goals to ethical behavior and the Code of Conduct. When you roll out your ethics training, participants will often ask the following questions. Why are we being trained on ethics? Is the organization trying to change my ethical or moral beliefs? Is this just another management fad? An organization's ability to answer these questions in a convincing way will go a long way toward eliminating the cynicism that often comes with new initiatives. So, how do you monitor and reinforce the code? One avenue many multinational organizations have taken is to set up an ethics office. Ethics officers now exist in over half of multinational companies recently surveyed by the Conference Board. Among the Japanese companies surveyed, the number was significantly higher, with 93% stating that they had an ethics officer. The Ethics Officer Association, or EOA, is a U.S.-based not-for-profit membership organization that began in 1991 with less than 10 individuals interested in ethics. Today, the EOA has over 600 members that have some kind of ethical responsibility in their organization. The EOA offers these individuals the opportunity to get together and discuss ethical issues. In October of this year, the EOA will convene their 7th annual conference, Assessing Our Success, Meeting Our Global Challenges. One of the primary roles of many ethics offices is to maintain a place where employees can go to raise questions and concerns. Depending on the organization, many companies implement some kind of a 1-800 number that is answered 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. At Nortel Networks, we implemented an alert line in the early 1990s. What do you think of when I say alert line?